So we are coming to the end of our sermon series on Nehemiah, but as we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, we've sort of been building on the story, but we always do a review. It's pretty good pedagogy, right? That it'll stick with you the more you repeat it. I'm looking at the teacher in the room to prove my point, right? And so where did Nehemiah start? What's that? In Babylon, correct. So this is part of the Babylonian exile. And so we get introduced to this character Nehemiah, who is a cupbearer for the Babylonian emperor, or excuse me, the Persian emperor. After the Israelites were taken into captivity into Babylon, the Babylonians got beaten by the Persians, and so they were kind of like passed as like people as goods from the Babylonians into the hands of the Persians, and so he becomes kind of a high-ranking servant, but actually enslaved to the Persian king Artaxerxes. So what happens? As an English teacher, we would call it the inciting incident of the story. What happens? The very first thing. His brother comes to him and says, "Jerusalem has been sacked." Right, so Jerusalem was really functioning as this place where those who were in exile, they were in exile anywhere between 60 and 80 years, depending on who's counting. But Jerusalem was really functioning as this. Well, if we could just get back there, if we could just everything would be perfect if we could just get back to Jerusalem. So then Nehemiah's brother comes to him and goes, "Bad news. Jerusalem's been ransacked. It's not the place that it is in your memories. It's not the place it is in your dreams. It's not the place that it is in the stories that you're telling yourself about it. It's been decimated." So then Nehemiah goes to Artaxerxes, and he's grieving, and Artaxerxes is like, "Whoa, you don't look so hot. What's going on?" And he goes, "My heart's broken. How could I possibly be okay when the city of my ancestors is totally messed up, right? It's totally been destroyed. All of the walls have been torn down." And so Artaxerxes says, "What do you need?" And he says, "Letters of passage that say I can go back, and wood so that I can start rebuilding." So Nehemiah gathers all the people who stretched themselves, and they worked next to other people, and they were not doing the thing that was their craft, but they tried their best, and they rebuilt the walls, and there was outside intervention that people were trying to halt the rebuilding, but they did it anyway, right? And so then where we are right now, last week on Nehemiah, what did we talk about? They had a party, right? So this is what's called the Festival of the Booths, or what our Jewish siblings call Sukkot, right? So it's this agricultural festival where they build basically pavilion tents that have no walls, right? There is no distinction between the inside and the outside, and they allow people to come in and be hosted and experience hospitality and the abundance of the harvest. And this was really important because the people who stayed in Jerusalem basically stole all the land that had belonged to the people who went into the exile. They were like, "Well, half our population's gone. I guess this land doesn't have an owner anymore." Yoink. And then when they came back, and you're trying to put these two populations together, they're like, "Wait a second, this was our land. We were poor. We're poor now. They're beating up on us." And Nehemiah asks of them justice. Give them back their land. Give them back even interest on the money that you made stealing their land from them, right? So this is not like a happy reunion all the way. And so after they worked through that conflict, they had this party that said, actually, we are one people, and we can celebrate, and there is enough for everyone. So then, and that was what Ezra, that's the first time we heard his name. He was leading them as a priestly figure, one of the Levites. And what he did was he had researched a bunch of the old practices. So we got in the text last week that they had not celebrated the Festival of the Booths since Joshua, son of Nun. So this is several hundred years back, because this is Moses, and Joshua was Moses' successor. So Moses didn't come into the Promised Land, and Joshua led the Israelites into the Promised Land and got them settled into their first taste of a non-nomadic life. So they had not been practicing this thing that was a resource in their past. They hadn't been practicing it, and they brought it from the past into the future. So then the very next thing is what we got here, which is a very intense reading with a lot of language that we would not normally use in our theological context, but I think it's really important because it is telling the story of their people. It is rooting them back in their whole history. So we saw this in sort of covert ways where Ezra's reading the law and they're like, oh wait, here's this beautiful celebration that we actually haven't been celebrating. Let's do that. And then Ezra follows that up with, remember who you are. Remember what God has done for you. Remember that you are only living one chapter of a very long story. That God has companioned this people through a lot of stuff. And that God's love is not dependent on you acting a certain way, but that God has been present, that God is a source of steadfast love and provision throughout your whole history. And so this is a communal practice. Everyone is gathered at this point, listening to this story and remembering. And I think it's really human to forget that we aren't it. Right? We get so caught up in the crises of this moment that this chapter is so intense. But if we can put ourselves in context, we have resources and lessons to learn about where we have been. And maybe it's not just us, but it is the people who made us who we are. It is the story of the people. When we find ourselves in that story, suddenly we are just responsible for our leg of the relay race. That there was work going on before us, that there will be a life of faith and justice going on after us, and our job is just to do the thing that is faithfully in front of us in this moment. Don't know about you, but that is really comforting right now. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There have been people who have been working for justice. There have people who have found ways forward throughout immense tragedy and pain and destabilization, and they have things to teach us that can inform how we move through this time, how we find God in this moment. And then our job is to set up for success those who are coming after us. There are images going around on Facebook that sort of say, whatever you're doing right now is what you would have done during the Civil Rights Movement, right? Or whatever you're doing right now is how you would have responded to 1940s Germany. Right, but then there is sort of sometimes a guilt to that, to goad you into moving or doing more. And when we're in a space of anxiety, that makes sense, right? There's a lot of reactivity, like, oh my gosh, the wheels are coming off, everything's terrible. We have to put out this fire and put out this fire and put out this fire. And yet, we are not having to reinvent the wheel. There are ways that people moved through society, creating sanctuary for people, that we can learn lessons from how they did that. There are ways of political organizing and organizing out of faith communities that happened during the Southern Freedom Movement that we can take the lessons that they learned and expound upon them. We are not alone. We have the wisdom that has been gathered for a really, really long time. And it is just ours to do this work right here, right now. I sat on a panel at my alma mater yesterday. I drove up to Denver and got to sit on a panel with ministers who are currently in training. They asked me to talk about joy in my vocation, especially in a time of great turmoil. And I was sitting in a room that I had my first seminary class in, and I was reminded of how space was held for me, the wisdom that was given to me in that room, which started me on the path that I am currently traveling. And it was such a joy to be able to share back some of the lessons that I had learned in that room with people who were beginning to travel a path I'm just a few years ahead of them on. But I was sitting with a couple of really amazing people, a board-certified chaplain who is currently working in a congregation, and the person who is currently the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the city of Denver. So it was a pretty amazing panel to be a part of and a conversation, but there were people whose names kept coming up in all of our sharing. I have mentioned Reverend Dr. Vincent Harding in this room before, who was a speechwriter for Martin Luther King Jr., but also did an amazing amount of organizing and bringing people together, including one of the first integrated church movements called Mennonite House in Atlanta, Georgia. So specifically doing racial justice and eco-justice in the late 50s and early 60s. He was bringing people together, teaching them nonviolent ways of being in community across difference, and then sending them out into the world to do justice work. So I was sitting in this room, I remembered one of the things that the stories that are told about him, that I never got to study with him directly, but I studied with people who had. And the person who is the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the city of Denver, he had been able to study directly with Dr. Harding. And so Dr. Harding was very alive and well in how we are shaped and formed as ministers. But one of the practices that Dr. Harding used to do was before he did anything, even if he was just giving a keynote speech, and they brought him because lots of people would bring him because they wanted to hear what was it like working that closely with Dr. King, what was it, helping shape his speech on Vietnam that was so impactful. You wrote that. How was that? They really wanted to know kind of the inside baseball of the Southern Freedom Movement. But that is not a game Dr. Harding played. That was not what he was about. He was about relationship building. And so instead of giving them kind of the inside scoop on the history that he had lived, what he did instead was he started building networks. So he was going to leverage the time that he had to create a network that would persist after he had gone. He had one night and one night only, but he was going to leave them better than he found them. And here's how he did it. He asked every person in the room to name their mama's mama and where they were from. Especially with black folks who, if you're thinking 2 generations back, would have just been, that's when slavery would have been ending, right? 2 generations back, like slavery would have been within living memory. What he was doing was he was finding kinship and shared experience with people, that there was connection beyond the site of their trauma, that because those people had survived, that those people were now in the room together. After worship today, we're going to be talking about a book that was a wildly unpopular pick, so that will be really, really interesting to talk about. But one of the essays is about the importance of the family reunion. And when you gather all of the cousins, there's a beautiful essay that ends with, we're kin, when finding a long-lost cousin. And so Dr. Harding, when he was bringing people together, he was invoking the wisdom and the survival of the people who came before, and had the potential to reunite close friends and family a couple of generations later, because that's when he was doing a lot of his work. People who were long lost to each other could find their way into the room, name the people who made them who they were, and find that connection. And then that connection of oh, your people were from this town, my people were from the next town over. Then the conversation and the sharing that continued well after he had gone to his next speaking engagement. There were speaking engagements where he never got to the thing that he'd been brought to keynote about because he invited the people to share. Who are your people? Who made you who you are? What story are you a part of? And there's such wisdom to that. Because there are resources in our history, people who have made us who we are, that survived the things that they were going through, that are now gifting us this wisdom that we get to survive and build on what they built and offer even more to the next generation. So we're going to do it. We are going to name our mama's mama and where they were from. I have a whiteboard here. If you know their birth name, and not necessarily their married name, we want their whole name and where they were from. And I want you to listen for the threads of commonality that you may not have known, even with people you've known for years or just met today or haven't met at all. And friends on Zoom, you don't get to get out of this one either, because this is part of what creates and weaves our community as a whole. Now, there are some people who naming or invoking the name of their mama's mama is not a pleasant experience. And so I want to invite you, if there is a mentor or someone who is rooted in a place that also made you who you are, you can swap that out. Perhaps that is a different grandparent. Perhaps it's someone who adopted you. This is not a doctrinal thing, but an experiential thing about how we have become who we are. And I will write our mama's mamas up here. Dana.
Okay, this is a doozy of a name, Lodema, L-O-D-E-M-A.
Lodema.
Middle name was Odessa.
Odessa, okay.
Maiden name was Grimm.
Grimm.
Yes, and then her married name was Williams, which is my mom's.
Great.
And so obviously by the Grimm, German origin, but Dover, Ohio is where she was born. My mom was raised.
Perfect. Who else are we calling in their wisdom and their survival? Pauline. Mills. Barlow. Mississippi. Guadalupe. Sorry, Del Nava, N-A-V-A. Okay. And where was she from? Okay. Awesome, thank you. Judy.
Jenny Black.
Jenny Black.
Married name was
Holman with an H?
Holman.
Okay.
Someplace around Green City, Illinois.
Okay. Martha.
Campbell, C-A-M-P-B-E-L-L. Married name Vogt, V-O-G-T.
Magnolia,
Magnolia, Minnesota.
Minnesota.
We got someone online too.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Oh, we've got You have Albertina Ayala from Panama. Eve Spangler, a grad school advisor in Boston and still a mentor, a good leftist feminist Jew. We love it. Okay. Is it Loretta or Loretto? Okay. From East St. Louis. Marta Taubert from Germany. Edna Mae Gamble from Pennsylvania. Lulu Marie Baker Bolton from Kansas. I love it. Marion Smith from, is it Norman's Cove? I can't, okay. Louise Jordan in rural Minnesota.
So it'd be Louise Cheney Jordan.
Oh, okay, perfect, thank you.
But that's also from England and Minnesota.
Nasobi, England. Laverna Bolton Snyder. From Spring Green, Wisconsin. Mary Ricker Rowe from Vermont, Ricker's Mill. Gertrude Ward from Cleveland, a great black lady who cared for me physically and taught me love. Perfect. And I will add my own, Margaret Castle from Mechanicsville, New York.
Ready for another one?
Sure.
Gertrude Adelaide Bransma Jackson.
Okay, Gertrude Adelaide. Got a couple of Gertrudes here. Brensma,
Bransma.
Brensma.
A-N-D.
Whoop, okay. B-R.
A-N-D-S-M.
And what was the last one?
Jackson.
Jackson. From where?
Flandreau. F-L-A-N-D-R-E-A-U.
F-L-A-N-D-R.
South Dakota.
E-A-U. Sounds good. Okay, perfect. Sure.
Elmer Gay Martin.
Elna Gay Martin. And where was she from, Tegan? Kansas. Perfect. Got some folks from Kansas with roots in Kansas. Yeah? Sure? Okay. Alfreda, Alfreda. Oh. Elfrida. And what was her last name? C-O-Y. And where is she from? Excellent. Look at all of these people who had to survive something for us to be here in this room now. All of these people who you are carrying their stories, their wisdom in you. We are not alone in trying to find resources in this time. We have to sift through, because sometimes not all of our family stories are great ones. And also, this is the story that we are part of, that links us back to something larger than ourselves, and gives us resources for how to move through into the future. Next week, we will be done with Nehemiah. I'm sure you're all very pleased. But the last thing that they do is they commit toward the future. They looked back and remembered who they were, how God had showed up in their lives, so that they can move toward a new future, bringing all of their ancestral birthright wisdom with them. You are because these people were. And I don't know, I see some commonalities here. We've got some folks from Kansas, we've got some folks from Germany. You know, there are lots from Minnesota, right? Like there are places where our stories intersect that maybe we weren't aware of before. It's up to you to share those stories with each other, to find the wisdom that exists so that we can begin to tell a story of all of us together. You have a piece of that story that is unique to you. No one else has it because no one else's family survived quite the same way. And so as we as a community figure out what joins us together so that we can lean into where our strengths are, you are a piece of that puzzle. We can't do it without you. Cindy.
What is really prevalent on that board is that almost all of these people are within one or two generations of being immigrants.
Yeah. So Cindy's saying that all of these people, if they are not immigrants themselves, they are within one or two generations. Lots of us are within one or two generations of being immigrants. It's true. Yeah. There are stories there. There are stories there, which can teach us a lot about this moment in time. And so the sermon's going to end, but the stories won't. This is the conversation for you all to have with each other, to find those commonalities, find those roots where we all, where our roots are tangled up in each other, where our survival is tangled up in each other's survival. This is not a new concept, that our life depends on each other. And so I hope you find by naming these people and their place in your life, your history, I hope you find the ways that it ties you to other people gathered here in community today. So as we tell the story of who we are and move toward the future, that we're bringing every resource, every ancestral wisdom that we have with us. Amen.